Welcome to this, the 13th episode of the English Sovereigns podcast series. In this episode, I shall be talking about the brief reign of King and Saint Edward the Martyr. It is perhaps terribly convenient for historians that Edward had the moniker, or the epithet at least, the Martyr, because really Edward should be King Edward I, because England was clearly an entity at this point, and so when we get to Edward the Confessor in 1042, I think it is, he should be Edward II, and then we get to the actual Edward I, Longshanks, in the year 1272, he should be Edward III. England clearly existed, so this annoys me probably more than it should annoy somebody, but yes, this is something that I would like to make clear now. Anyhow, so Edward was only 13 years old when he became king, and his lineage and legitimacy was contested. King Edgar, his father, and Ethelfled, allegedly his first wife, or may have just been a harlot, or even a nun, it is suggested. It's disputed as to whether they were actually married, which meant that when Edgar died in 975, civil war nearly broke out between the faction supporting Edward, which was Archbishop Dunstan and Archbishop Oswald of York, and then Queen Elfrith, who was the mother of the legitimate King Ethelred, or future King Ethelred, Prince Ethelred, I suppose at this point, and Bishop Ethelwald of Winchester, as well as a lot of nobles who had been dispossessed of their land under King Edgar and his reforms to make the monasteries more Benedictine in nature. Eventually a compromise was reached that Edward would become the king, where I think Ethelred was given some additional land to make up for not being king and the income that would obviously come from that. And then he also allowed those nobles to take back control of a lot of the land that they had lost under King Edgar. So it was kind of a little bit weak, I suppose. Although you've got to bear in mind that Edward was only 13 when he became king. But so the people around him at least were perfectly content to let the nobles take back the land that Edgar had confiscated off of them. Nevertheless, the succession was therefore resolved. A comet did appear at the start of his reign, as it did actually in 1066 when Edward the Confessor died. And obviously a comet is not really seen as a good omen, and Anglo-Saxon Chronicle does report that there were a few famines and quite a lot of hardship at the start of Edward's reign. Edward's reign ended with his own death and murder in the year 978 at Corfe Castle, which is kind of a popular tourist destination nowadays on the Dorset coast near Swanage. He was murdered there. I think it's probably safe to assume, it's not completely 100% certain that he was, but he probably was, because he was hurriedly buried at Wareham, which again is quite close, probably by his former stepmother Elfrith, who, as we know, was the mother of the future King Ethelred, or indeed by acolytes of Ethelred himself. Ethelred himself at this point was about 9. He was quite a young man as well. Nowhere near, well, he wasn't a man, he was a boy when Edward was murdered, so I don't think it was Ethelred himself. We don't know precisely why he was murdered, but we can probably hazard a guess in that maybe he hadn't quite reached maturity. He was only about 17 when he was murdered. Had he lived another couple of years, he would have reached maturity and then been able to maybe have reversed some of the nobles taking back the land that Edgar had confiscated off of them, so maybe it was a preemptive move, or maybe it was Elfrith trying to make sure her son got on the throne. Edward, perhaps might have just been a terrible king and needed to be killed, otherwise it would have been a good 20, 30, 40 years of his reign, which would have been miserable for everybody. We don't entirely know, and neither do we know precisely who. What's quite curious, though, is that he has been made a saint in the Catholic Church and in the Eastern Orthodox Church, as well as in the Anglican Communion. Little is really known of his character, but he has been promoted to the sainthood, perhaps by King Canute, who would come after Ethelred in, I think, 1016. I need to check that. But yeah, might have been to discredit Ethelred's reign, that he perhaps authorised the murder of his own brother, Or indeed it might have been Ethelred himself who was promoting his own brother as a saint, perhaps to bolster the prestige of the House of Wessex. You can never quite know, but he's venerated, really, this king, Edward, despite not really doing an awful lot and only being king for 3 years. So there we go. That was the reign of Edward the First, or the Martyr, depending on who you're talking to. In episode 14, I will be talking about King Ethelred, who will reign twice. See you then.